Story 1. Buy a badass muscle car for cheap, $3,000 then. Get credentials, invest in international business machines, Apple, Microsoft, and other up-and-coming companies, bet on Super Bowl winners, here's to Marty McFly, and enjoy life. Go to Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, David Bowie, and Queen concerts and generally enjoy life. Story 2. Go to the nearest graveyard, look for the grave of an infant born at the same time as me, get a birth certificate, then a passport. Then, with $19,950.40, the world is my oyster. Story 3. Funny. I asked my father's drunk friend exactly this question at the Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall in 1970 when I was 10. He said, "I'd buy Coca-Cola stock, because there's a billion Chinese and someday they're all gonna drink Coca-Cola." The Warren Buffet of the Winos. Story 4. This raises questions. Where am I? Am I 20-year-old me with the knowledge, experiences, and memories I had then, or am I me now, 61, with the same? And given that I was 7 years old in 1970, does 7-year-old me also exist? And most importantly, how can I know that the timeline will be the same as in reality from 1970 to now, given the addition of 20-year-old me to the timeline in 1970? Story 5. Find someone who died in childhood who would be roughly my age. Then I would go to wherever records were held and request their birth certificate. Finally, I would head to another town and use that birth certificate to get a social security card. Boom. I'm real. Then buy myself a house, invest a lot of money, find a job, and so on. Or maybe I would just have a breakdown and cry since my family is gone now. Story 6. Going to turn that $20,000 into $200 million. Looks like the crack epidemic is going to get started a little early. Unless Chappelle lied, the recipe is just some cocaine and some baking soda, and I think I taste egg and cinnamon. Story 7. Hold up in a hotel in downtown Los Angeles. Make my way over to MacArthur Park for papers. Grab a pastrami sandwich at Langer's and then go apply for a job in accounting. Fake my college degree. Get some money, rent a place in Venice Beach, and spend the rest of my days soaking up cheap sunshine, putting extra cash into buying property before I could quit my day job. Story 8. Show up at my grandparents' house with quite a story. I'm fairly sure both would believe me, and my grandfather would sit me down for a detailed talk about the stock market for the years he's alive. Story 9. Assuming I have the knowledge I have now, set aside $5,000 in a savings account and find a menial job to get by. Buy McDonald's stock with the remaining $15,000, then sell it in late 1972. Use the proceeds to buy Walmart stock in 1975 on full margin, add Home Depot stock in 1982, add Microsoft stock in 1986, and Cisco Systems stock in 1990. I should have several billion dollars by the 1990s. Story 10. My name is Sam Tyler. I had an accident, and I woke up in 1973. Am I mad, in a coma, or back in time? Whatever has happened, it is like I have landed on a different planet. Now, maybe if I can work out the reason, I can get home. Story 11. Since I am a woman and not subject to the draft that was happening in 1970, I would 1. Take a Greyhound bus to the closest large city. Go to the largest library in that city and use the microfiche to search for birth announcements and obituaries of girls who were born and then died within months of birth. Birth announcements and obituaries were extremely detailed back then, so I could obtain the parents' names, the date of birth, the city and county of birth, and the hospital of birth. I would find a girl who, if she had lived, would now be 21. Then, take a bus to the clerk recorder for the county where the deceased infant was born and pay for a certified copy of their birth certificate. Additional questions would be very unusual, but any asked would be met with sympathy after telling them of the tragic death of my parents in a house fire. I am now the person on the certified birth certificate. Then go to the nearest Salvation Army and get 3 or 4 changes of demure, plain clothes, and some basic toiletries. Then, go to the nearest Motel 6 and get a room for the night. Why Motel 6? Because in 1970, a room at Motel 6 cost $6, and they were good, clean rooms with a phone. Get some newspapers and start calling ads for single-girl roommate apartments with immediate availability. Agree to the cheapest available and move in as quickly as possible. Back then, in cities, you could find a room to live with another girl very easily, because people were very trusting. With a place to live and an address of record, start the process to get a driver's license, a passport, a social security number, and open a bank account with my $20,000, which was equivalent to approximately $160,000 in 1970, a lot of money. People didn't get assigned social security numbers at birth back then, especially girls. Usually, everyone got them when they got a job and had to pay taxes. Once I received my documents at my address of record, begin a job search and start living my new life by buying some white go-go boots, hoop earrings, and some mini skirts for my off time. Story 12. 2 years after you land, the Dolphins go undefeated and win the Super Bowl. You could bet on them to win every game and be an enthusiastic superfan. Then use that capital to buy a large amount of empty land in areas that are about to boom, investing the rest in Apple. This sounds fun. Choose me next. Story 13. I'm just going to live in a roadside motel and literally go to work for a janitor place. Perfect for me. I get money and pretty much no one is going to bother me for a good while. I can probably get a wife and then work myself up in the world. This was during the time when that was still a thing, when you work hard and you get somewhere good. Edit. Forget janitorial. I can be a plumber. Story 14. I was 19 in 1970 and lived in New York City. I was able to sublet a nice studio apartment in the East Village for $130 a month. I worked taking reservations for Holiday Inn and could support myself, afford movies, saw Broadway plays like Hair and Fiddler on the Roof, and most of the museums were free or cost a minimal admission fee. I was healthy enough to walk for miles all over the city and just soak in the city. I had a social security card and a bus pass, but not much other identification. I grew up in a brownstone in Park Slope, but by the 1970s, the area was run down. My dad offered the house to me because he moved in with my stepmother and didn't need our old house but couldn't sell it. With $20,000, I could have fixed it up, rented out the apartment on the top floor, and today the house is worth over $1 million. Story 15. The first thing I do is hitch a ride to the nearest city. I see a beige Volkswagen Beetle approaching me, driven by a handsome gentleman who appears to have a broken arm. This looks safe. I'll travel with him. Story 16. Hopefully, it's early February, and I can start following the Grateful Dead at the Fillmore East and start from there. Owsley will be impressed enough by the $20,000 to keep me in liquid until the retirement. Story 17. Sort out fake documents, not completely sure how to do that in 1970s Australia, but it doesn't seem impossible. Get myself on unemployment benefits or get an easy enough job. Travel Southeast Asia at the tail end of the hippie trail. Curse myself for not knowing more sports or horse race winners. Story 18. I'd start by purchasing a brand new Gran Turismo Homologado. After that, I would figure it out. 1970 was still the cash economy, and I'm sure applying for a social security card and getting a driver's license would be nothing like today. Story 19. Move to a small rural town and claim to be 17 and a runaway from an abusive home. Invest the money. Try to gain an identity by claiming to be an orphan or something. Live as frugally as possible as you watch companies like Walmart and Apple grow significantly. Even your average person will eventually have a good idea of foolproof stocks. Retire very comfortably, with your family and loved ones remembering all of your famous holiday investment tips. Story 20. Do I know what is going to happen in the future? If so, get a fake identification or something, get a job, rent a house, invest money, place bets on a few games or events I know the outcome of, see all the bands I wish I had seen, travel to places that I know become tourist traps years later. If I don't know, probably blow it all on hookers and beer. Story 21. Find a job, open a bank account, buy a house, and support the family I build on my single income with a better quality of life than I have now. Story 22. I would get an identity from a dead kid and find my way to wherever the Grateful Dead was currently playing. In 1970, with $20,000, I could go into business with the band and spend the rest of my life doing that. Story 23. Buy a camper van, get a German Shepherd, and go traveling. Work in bars here and there to top up my cash, maybe writing a journal that could later become a book. Story 24. Get a room. Locate a deceased child that would be 20 if alive. Get a duplicate or copy of the birth certificate by mail. Get a driver's license and social security number. Get a high school and college diploma copied from the real thing at a print shop. Join a community club, for example, Elks, Lions, Moose, JCs. Get a job. Invest in Apple, Microsoft, and electronic data systems. Buy a house. Story 25. Buy a house and live off the remaining $17,000 for a year while I work on building contacts and sorting out the income situation. Patent and profit from a large number of algorithms at the root of future technologies that I now have totally thought of first. Then find some loyal assistants and set up my volcano lair. Story 26. Jesus, with $20,000 and about 6 months of patience and operational security, you can easily set yourself up with a new identity and $15,000 of runway. If I think there is any way to jump home, I will pursue that while trying to avoid butterfly effect complications. If I'm convinced I'm stuck, then I'll live off the grid and do my best to avoid affecting my own life because I don't want to prevent my kids from existing. Story 27. I would go buy a house, a car, and a boat on handshake deals at next to no interest with a local community bank, and invest that $20,000 into progressively better stocks, starting with international business machines. Then I would live off the growing interest of my amazing investment portfolio, spending every weekend on my ever larger boats, and every weekday sleeping off what I assume will become a problematic cocaine habit. Story 28. I would probably find and befriend my grandparents and try to get a job from them. Then after I settled in, I would buy stocks in all of the obvious companies. Although that is a slow burn for quicker money, I would bet on some things like Richard Nixon winning in 1972. Story 29. State ID card. I filled out a card at the Department of Motor Vehicles and got one in the 1970s with no supporting documents. Stupid me used my real name but a fake birthday so I could buy beer. I could have assumed a new identity with a cool name and kept it going all these years. Story 30. If I get to retain everything I currently know, I would start an engineering company that specializes in aerospace superalloys. Having a 50-year jump on the technology would be worth billions. The difficulty would be filling in my knowledge gaps. So, I would hire people that I knew would eventually be technology leaders and then feed them clues to guide their development. Reminds me of the movie The Man Who Fell to Earth starring David Bowie. It's basically about an alien that gets stranded on Earth and shares his advanced knowledge. Story 31. Reading through this thread begs one to think. If someone did, in fact, travel to our time from the future, they wouldn't have done very much at all. Made some good investments and lived life on an island. Kind of contrary to how one would think that they would come back with some future technology that could change the world, some information, a warning. Nope. The time traveler would just be some cryptocurrency enthusiast chilling on a boat getting drunk. Story 32. Become the most successful heroin dealer and Central Intelligence Agency asset in American history. Or if that's too rough, probably buy several lots in Orange County and get a job cleaning floors for the 2025 equivalent of $256,000 a year. Story 33. Find a homeless guy and offer $50 for his pants and shirt. Then find the first person with a 1969 Chevrolet Camaro, a Chevrolet Corvette ZL1, or a Chevrolet Chevelle SSL 78 and offer them $500 over the dealer price on the spot. I can live in the car at first, then I'm going to ask around and find out who can give me some identification. Once that's done, I'll apply for a job at a gas station or something to get some steady pay and start building my life. All the remaining cash will be for investment. Nothing big in place. I don't want to risk changing markets. Once I have enough, I can move up to New England, probably Newport or Providence, somewhere quiet. I'll open my dream boat shop and spend my years working on classic wooden boats for the old money. Story 34. I'd get a bus ticket to my grandmother's hometown. It's in the middle of nowhere. It wouldn't take much effort to convince her I'm her time-traveling grandson. Between what I know about my dad and all the things I know about her, she'd eventually come around. Then I'd spend the next 5 years trying to avoid getting drafted and sent to war in Vietnam. Story 35. To put inflation in perspective, my dad bought a house in the Portland West Hills for $2,400 in 1961. He made 4 payments of $600 from his wages as a machinist. I looked on Zillow a couple of years ago, and that house is now worth $2,100,000. $50,000 was a lot of money in 1970. Story 36. I am female. $20,000 in 1970? I need an identity and a college education. Find an identity in a local graveyard, mock up some high school transcripts, and get into a great college. Buy a house near campus and rent out the rooms to cover the bills. Which state allowed women to own land in 1970? I do not think I could get a mortgage, but I could buy most houses outright. Save up as many pennies as possible to buy some Microsoft when it goes public. Some Berkshire Hathaway. Get a bigger house. And a little red Corvette. Story 37. Get an apartment. Bet on sports. Bet on anything that you know the outcome for. Bet the Dolphins have an undefeated season in 1972. Bet Jimmy Carter wins in 1977. Or Nixon in 1973. Live in Vegas. Invest in stocks in the 1980s like Apple, Nintendo, Atari, and others. Story 38. Everybody is suggesting that you get a fake identification. But that is really not necessary. You are a real human. They won't put you in jail for not having any kind of identification. Go to a lawyer's office. Tell them you were born deep in the Appalachian Mountains. A midwife helped deliver you, and you have no identification. A lawyer can help get you set up. As to what to do after that, anything you want. Invest in the big name brand companies you know of now. The stock market in general is going to be fine, but Walmart was started around this time, Microsoft and Apple sometime later. Invest in oil. There is an oil crisis coming up.